Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to replace the steering wheel on a 2004 Lexus GS 300. The steering wheel, as you can see on my car, is very old and the leather is falling apart. So I'm going to remove it and get it reupholstered. I'm going to show you step by step how to remove the old steering wheel, reset the clock spring, and then reinstall our new reupholstered steering wheel. Before we get started, a very important warning. Whenever you're working with any part of the car that involves airbags, such as the steering wheel, you need to disconnect the battery for at least an hour prior to starting work. This ensures that there is no residual charge anywhere in the system that may trigger an airbag when you're working on it. By the same token, always remember to reconnect the battery only after you've completely reinstalled the airbag. Most cars will record an SRS DTC if the battery is reconnected or the key is turned to the ignition or the on position and the airbag is not connected. Now that we've got the warnings out of the way, we can get started. In this video, I'll be working on a junkyard GS that I found as I couldn't film the process on my own car because of some interesting reasons. The first step is to turn the steering wheel so that the wheels point straight ahead. As you can see, I can't do it in this case since I don't have the key to the junkyard GS. So for the rest of the video, I'm just going to proceed by assuming that the wheels are turned straight ahead. First, we'll need to remove the airbag. To remove the two screws holding the airbag in, we need to remove these two plastic covers on either side of the steering wheel as shown. Anything long and sharp will do. I ended up using the blade of a nail cutter to do this. The plastic scratches pretty easily, so be careful. Now that the two covers are removed, you can see the two screws that I was talking about. To remove them, you'll need a T30 Torx bit. Once you've loosened the two screws and then unscrewed them all the way, it is very helpful to use a long magnetic pickup tool like this one to get the screws out completely. Now you should be able to pull the airbag off of the steering wheel. The airbag connector holding it in is very easy to see as it is bright yellow. To disconnect the connector, you'll need to push on this white part and then the connector will slide off easily. Now you can go ahead and completely remove the airbag from the steering wheel. While setting the airbag down, always remember to keep it so that the emblem faces upwards. The next step is to remove the steering wheel from the steering column. There is one nut holding it in, which is 19mm in size. While loosening the nut, you'll need to hold the steering wheel so that the whole wheel doesn't turn. My apologies for the glare in the video as it was getting towards the end of the day. Using a paint marker or a Sharpie, draw an alignment mark on both the steering wheel and the steering column stud so that you can put it back together in the exact same position. Even though we remove the nut, most likely the steering wheel won't come off if you just pull it. You'll need a special toolset in order to remove the steering wheel, which is called a harmonic balancer puller or a steering wheel puller. You can find this at your local parts store and you can loan it out and return it when you're done. The four components that we'll be using are the center screw or the pressure screw, the sharp cap which goes on the end of the pressure screw, any two bolts which you'll have to select from the four sets of bolts that you can see in the kit, and finally this interestingly shaped object which is the puller. Each of the four sets of bolts have different thread sizes and therefore fit different steering wheels. You'll have to try a bolt from each of the sets and find out which two fit these two bolt holes in the steering wheel. Take the two bolts that you selected and then insert them through the puller and then thread them into the two holes on the steering wheel. Obviously they don't have to be threaded in too deep, but make sure that they're pretty tight. Next, take the pressure center screw and thread it into the middle of the puller as shown. After you thread the pressure screw in, you should apply this pointed cap at the end. This ensures that the center screw and therefore the puller both stay centered on the steering column and don't slip off. As you keep turning the pressure screw, at one point it will contact the steering column stud and the puller will start moving towards you as you can see. Keep turning it until you can't turn it anymore and the puller is completely backed up against the two side bolts as shown. Now, using a ratchet and a 19mm socket, turn the center screw further until the steering wheel breaks loose as shown. Unscrew the two side bolts and then remove the puller from the steering wheel. As you can see, the steering wheel is now completely loose and the only thing holding it on is the electrical connector for the horn and the steering wheel buttons. All you have to do is push upwards on this part of the connector to remove it and the steering wheel will now come off. Now it's time to get the wheel reupholstered with new leather and then install it on my car. I got my steering wheel reupholstered at a shop called Locally Hated Wraps, located not too far away from me in California. The The best way to contact the owner of the shop, Maxim, is through his Instagram page. You can find a link to it in the video description below. You get to choose between either vinyl or leather for your material, with vinyl being cheaper and leather being more expensive. Since my steering wheel is tan, it's very hard to match vinyl to it, so I decided to go with leather. I paid around $450 for the job, and I think it was worth every penny, especially considering the quality of the material and the workmanship. As you can see when I put the airbag back on, there are two color tones in the leather. I went for this combination because I found the original steering wheel to be a rather dull and uniform tan color, and frankly, I found it quite boring. As you can see, the interior of the GS has two different shades of tan, one a little darker and the other a little lighter, so I think the wheel should match up pretty good. Let's put it back on and see what it looks like. Before we do this, I'm going to quickly show you how to reset the clock spring. The clock spring is a rotating device which makes sure that all the buttons on the steering wheel, such as the horn or the audio controls, work even when you've turned the steering wheel all the way to one side or the other. Remember that I told you at the start of the video that you need to have the wheels pointing straight ahead before you remove the steering wheel. The clock spring can only turn a certain number of revolutions in either direction. That is why it is important to center the clock spring before you install the steering wheel. Otherwise, if it is not centered and you install the steering wheel and try to turn it past the limit of the clock spring, it's just gonna break. As you can see, this clock spring says 5 turns. That means it can only turn 5 revolutions from one side to the other. The first step to center the clock spring is to turn it all the way to either the left or the right until it can't turn anymore. As you can see, I can't turn it anymore, and the clock spring is now at its left limit. Since the clock spring makes only 5 complete revolutions, all you have to do to center it is turn it towards the right 2.5 revolutions. Once you do that, you'll also see that these two match marks will line up. Now the clock spring is centered and we can reinstall the steering wheel. Put the wheel back on, making sure that the two match marks you put on earlier line up. Don't forget to push in the electrical connector for the steering wheel buttons. Put the nut back on and then tighten it down while holding the steering wheel so that it doesn't turn. This nut needs to be torqued down to 26 foot-pounds. Now connect the electrical connector for the airbag and then put it in place on the steering wheel. The two Torx screws holding the airbag down are quite interesting in design. You might face some trouble putting them back in if you don't know how they work. So let's see that. As you can see, the screws have a little notch in their head which needs to slide into the casing on the airbag. So if the notch hasn't slid into the casing as shown and you try to turn the screw, it's just going to keep spinning and never catch on to the threads. I found that the best way to do this is by using the long magnetic pickup tool that I showed you earlier and then push the screw into the casing by wiggling it around. It might take a few minutes, but eventually the screw will slide into the casing and you can tighten it down. If you need the torque specs for these two screws, it is 78 inch-pounds. I didn't torque them down, just make sure they were nice and snug. Once you've done that, reinstall the two plastic covers on either side of the wheel. Now go ahead and reconnect the battery and turn the key to the on position. The airbag light should come on and then go off in a few seconds. Don't forget to press on the horn too and make sure it works.